Have you ever found yourself helping someone over and over again, only to realize that they don't appreciate your efforts? It's as if the more you reach out, the more that person expects you to solve everything for them without offering anything in return. This can be frustrating, but it's a truth that many people are reluctant to accept. There are people who simply don't deserve your help. And no, this isn't selfishness. On the contrary, Stoicism itself, defended by thinkers such as Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, and Epictetus, teaches us that sometimes the best way to live a virtuous and balanced life is to know when to stop helping certain people. Sound harsh? Maybe. But this is precisely where Stoic knowledge comes into play. There are situations in which, no matter how much you do, the other person doesn't change. They settle into the role of victim, become dependent, or, worse, take advantage of your goodwill. What if I told you that continuing to help may be hurting you more than you realize? The truth is that when you keep these people in your life, you are wasting energy, time, and often even your own peace. Imagine how much progress you could make if you stopped investing so much in those who are not willing to change. In this video, I will show you 8 clear reasons to stop helping certain people based on the teachings of Stoicism. Get ready, because some of them may surprise you and, who knows, change the way you deal with those around you. Let's get started. Reason 1: lack of reciprocity. If there is one thing that the philosophy of Stoicism teaches us, it is the importance of balance in relationships. When a person constantly extends a helping hand but never receives anything in return, it causes deep emotional distress. Seneca reminds us that it is not the quantity that matters, but the quality of interactions. Reciprocity is not about accounting. It is about recognizing the value of the other. Imagine yourself always available, ready to help, but the return of this is empty. This lack of reciprocity undermines trust and respect in the relationship, something that Marcus Aurelius reflected when he said that the indifference of a partner is the first sign of estrangement. In practice, this manifests itself in small acts, that friend who always asks for favors but is never there when you need them. This is not friendship, it is disguised parasitism. The Stoic, as Epictetus suggests, must be vigilant about the value of his relationships. You are not asking for the impossible, you are seeking something natural in any human interaction: mutual recognition. Start observing more closely. Maybe the person you think is close to you is actually just taking advantage of your goodwill. The consequences of maintaining relationships without reciprocity can be devastating. You become emotionally exhausted, your self-esteem diminishes, and most seriously, you begin to question your own worth. Epictetus would say that at this time, it is crucial to remember your intrinsic value, something that must be unshakable. For those who are experiencing this, it is essential to reflect. What are the signs that this reciprocity was never a two-way street? Maybe it is time to reconsider certain friendships. And why is it so difficult to cut these relationships? Because we often confuse kindness with obligation. Marcus Aurelius in his writings warned about the danger of being carried away by the desire to please everyone. By always trying to be the good guy, you end up neglecting yourself, allowing people to take advantage of you. Start asking yourself, who really deserves my attention and energy? The lack of reciprocity is not limited to friendships. At work, in family relationships, and even in romantic relationships, when only one side gives, the balance quickly becomes unbearable. A classic example is that co-worker who always supports you but never offers help. The solution? Set clear boundaries. As a true Stoic, you don't need to be rude but firm. A practical approach can be self-analysis. Ask yourself, what am I getting in return? Of course, it's not about seeking reciprocity in everything, but rather understanding whether the relationship is flowing in a healthy way. Seneca taught us that the value of relationships lies in their depth, not in their breadth. If you feel like you're always giving more, it's time to reflect on who deserves your time. So remember, it's not selfishness, it's self-care. Stoicism teaches us to value our actions and our affections. You don't need to feel guilty for expecting a balanced relationship. Epictetus said that nothing that happens to us is beyond our control, and that includes the people we choose to keep in our lives. Sometimes the greatest act of wisdom is to simply let go. Reason 2, toxic behavior. Toxic behavior is like a dark cloud that gradually takes over any environment. From the perspective of Stoicism, this type of behavior goes against everything that great philosophers such as Seneca, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius preached. Corrosive behavior undermines inner peace and drives away those around us. However, the most dangerous thing is when we tolerate it in the name of false harmony. When someone around us constantly spreads negativity, manipulates, or tries to control, we are not only allowing them to affect us, but we are also allowing them to distance us from our own virtuous nature. In practice, a toxic person can act in many ways, manipulating emotions, constantly criticizing or making others feel guilty for their own problems. A simple example is that friend who, whenever you try to grow or make an important decision, makes derogatory comments or tries to derail your plans. For the Stoic, as Epictetus would suggest, the key is to stand firm without being sucked into this tide of negativity. The big challenge is to recognize this behavior before it consumes your energy. Seneca would say that we need to be aware of what is really necessary for our mental and emotional health. Allowing a toxic person to remain in your life is like allowing poison to spread little by little. And the truth is that over time, the people around you also begin to notice this toxicity, which can lead to isolation, not by choice, but by the effect of coexistence. In the workplace, for example, toxic people can be those who create intrigue, promote gossip, or constantly criticize the efforts of others. Instead of encouraging an environment of collaboration, they prefer to sow distrust. Marcus Aurelius reminds us that, when faced with difficult situations, we must remain calm and focus on what we can really control, our actions and reactions. In this case, the best reaction is to distance ourselves emotionally and limit the impact of this type of behavior. To deal with toxic behavior, the first step is to set limits. A true Stoic knows that these limits are not a sign of weakness, but rather of self-care. Marcus Aurelius wrote that life is what your thoughts make it. Therefore, if you continue to allow the presence of those who constantly harm you, you are, in a way, choosing that path. Change begins when you decide to prioritize your well-being and peace of mind. Another important point is to understand that you are not obligated to save or change a toxic person. Epictetus teaches us that each person is responsible for their own attitudes. Therefore, when you try to rescue someone who does not want to be rescued, you only wear yourself out emotionally. The wisest solution is to distance yourself and, when necessary, cut ties for good. This is not a cold attitude, it is a wise attitude, an important reflection. How do you react to the toxic behaviors around you? Could it be that in some way you are allowing them to affect you more than they should? For those who seek to align themselves with the teachings of Seneca and Epictetus, it is essential to cultivate serenity in the face of adversity, and above all, learn to distance yourself from everything that does not contribute to your inner peace. Reason 3, continued victimization. Living in the constant position of victim is like carrying a weight that does not belong to you. Stoicism teaches us, from Seneca to Marcus Aurelius, that we are responsible for our reactions to life's events, and we should not cling to victimhood. Those who continually position themselves as victims distance themselves from their own ability to act and change circumstances. By feeding the narrative that the world is always against them, these people deny themselves the power to transform adversity into opportunities. Marcus Aurelius wisely said, "The happiness of your life depends on the quality of your thoughts." Continuous victimhood can be seen in small, everyday attitudes. A clear example is that person who, instead of seeking solutions to their problems, always prefers to blame others or the circumstances. It is never their fault, and thus the cycle of victimhood perpetuates itself. For those who follow the principles of Epictetus, this is a serious mistake. He teaches us that we have no control over what happens, but we do have total control over how we react, and victimization is the abdication of that control. One of the great pitfalls of victimization is that it seems to offer a comfortable way out. After all, it is much easier to blame fate, bad luck, or other people than to accept responsibility for one's own choices. However, the Stoic knows that this is a dangerous illusion. Seneca warns us that the path to freedom lies in recognizing our own strengths. When someone sees themselves as a victim, they are, in fact, imprisoning themselves in a life without progress, stagnant in excuses. To escape this cycle, it takes deep self-criticism and a lot of courage. When you stop seeing yourself as a victim, you begin to see the possibilities for change around you. If, for example, something went wrong at work, instead of complaining or blaming your boss, you can focus on how to improve your skills, increase your productivity, or seek new opportunities. Epictetus would remind us that true power lies in recognizing that we are the masters of our own lives. In social interactions, continuous victimization also drives people away. No one likes to be around someone who is always complaining, and putting themselves down. Marcus Aurelius would say that we should be beacons, shining a light that inspires and lifts others up. When you allow victimhood to dominate your interactions, you lose this ability to positively influence the environment around you. The practical solution to victimhood is to start adopting a more positive and proactive discourse. Instead of saying, "I can't do it because no one helps me," you can change it to, "What can I do to improve this situation?" Small changes in mindset, aligned with the teachings of Epictetus, can radically transform the way you face challenges. Remember, you are not a victim of fate. You are the architect of your reality. A deep reflection: have you in some way placed yourself in the position of a victim in certain aspects of your life? Seneca invites us to reflect on our choices and on how willing we are to take control of our destiny. Perhaps it is time to leave victimhood behind and start acting with the strength and wisdom that you already possess. Reason 4: excessive dependence. Excessive dependence is a trap that traps not only those who depend, but also those who are dependent. In Stoicism, autonomy and self-sufficiency are central values, remembered by Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, and Epictetus. A person who constantly relies on others to make decisions or solve problems ends up losing the ability to deal with life's difficulties. It's like someone who gets used to using a cane, even though they have the strength to walk on their own. Marco Aurelio said that we must be prepared to walk alone when necessary, as life does not always offer us external support. This dependence can arise in various areas of life. A clear example is personal relationships, where someone relies excessively on their partner for emotional, financial issues, or even simple everyday decisions. Epictetus warned us about the importance of being masters of ourselves. When we become excessively dependent, we are, in a way, giving up our freedom. For those who find themselves in this situation, a simple reflection might be, am I relying too much on others to do what I should be able to do myself? The problem of excessive dependence is not only practical, but also psychological. The more we depend on others, the more we feel a sense of insecurity when we are alone. This creates a cycle of anxiety and fear, as if the person can no longer support themselves without outside help. Marco Aurelio would say that true strength lies in our ability to be self-sufficient, to be resilient in the face of adversity without needing to constantly seek support or validation from others. In the professional field, excessive dependence can be seen in those people who are afraid of making decisions without first consulting someone. An example would be an employee who, faced with a simple situation, needs confirmation from a superior before taking action. Not only does this stunt your growth, but it also demonstrates a lack of confidence in your own abilities. Seneca's advice would be, take responsibility for your actions. Whoever fears making mistakes never learns. The solution, therefore, is to start taking small steps towards independence. Now, if you feel like you're stuck in this cycle of dependence, change can start with simple actions. Start by taking on small responsibilities. Do something on your own without asking for help. It may seem challenging at first, but little by little you will notice how your confidence grows. Epictetus emphasized the importance of taking control over what is in our hands, and this includes everyday decisions. The more you do this, the more you will free yourself from the constant need for support. Another trap of addiction is believing that we need others to feel complete. This is a common mistake in relationships, where one person places responsibility for their happiness on the other. But as Epictetus reminds us, true happiness comes from within, from a mind at peace with itself. Placing this responsibility on others is unfair and unsustainable. A healthy relationship, be it friendship, love, or work, must be built on the independence of each party and not on excessive dependence. An important reflection: are you placing responsibility on other people for something that should be yours? Seneca invites us to reflect on our actions and decisions. Maybe it's time to take full control of your life and realize that you are capable of much more than you imagine without needing to depend so much on others to move forward. Reason 5, lack of gratitude. A lack of gratitude is one of the most subtle yet most corrosive flaws that can exist in human relationships. In Stoicism, the practice of gratitude is directly linked to the wisdom of living well, as Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, and Epictetus teach us. When someone fails to recognize the value of things, people, or moments they receive, they begin to close themselves off to the true essence of life. Seneca said that gratitude is a virtue of the noble, as it requires a keen perception of what is truly important. Ignoring this principle is distancing oneself from the fullness that life can offer. In everyday situations, we see a lack of gratitude in small acts. That co-worker who never recognizes the efforts of others, or that friend who always receives help but never remembers to say thank you. These actions, no matter how small, gradually erode trust and respect in relationships. For the Stoic, as Epictetus would teach, gratitude is not just an expression of politeness, but a daily practice of recognizing the intrinsic value of the things and people around us. The lack of gratitude is also deeply connected to chronic dissatisfaction. When someone is not grateful for what they have, they are always looking for more, without ever feeling complete. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, reflected on how we should be grateful for every little gift that the universe offers us, from the simple fact of being alive to the opportunities to learn in each difficulty. When we forget to be grateful, we distance ourselves from the joy of living in the present moment. In personal relationships, the lack of gratitude can manifest itself in an even more harmful way. A practical example is a partner who never appreciates the daily efforts of the other, assuming that everything they receive is an obligation. Over time, This lack of recognition turns into resentment, opening the way for the deterioration of the bond. Epictetus would warn us to be careful with what we take for granted, because even the simplest things can be the most precious. To start changing this dynamic, a person must consciously incorporate gratitude. A simple but powerful exercise would be to start reflecting daily on 3 things for which you are grateful. This practice, which seems simple, can radically change the way you approach your day-to-day life. Seneca would teach us that gratitude opens our eyes to what we already have, instead of keeping us focused on what we think we lack. And little by little, this mindset transforms not only the person, but also the relationships around them. In the workplace, a lack of gratitude can also be a major obstacle to progress. Those who do not recognize the efforts of their colleagues or who constantly criticize without ever praising end up creating an environment of demotivation. Marcus Aurelius would remind us that just as the body needs food, the spirit needs recognition. Gratitude in this context works as an emotional fuel that strengthens teams and promotes collaboration. A question for reflection: have you been expressing enough gratitude for the things and people that are part of your life? Seneca invites us to never take anything for granted. Maybe it's time to stop, look around and realize how much you already have to be thankful for before always looking for something more. Reason 6. Lack of self-effort. Lack of self-effort is a silent poison for personal growth and for achieving anything significant in life. Stoicism, as taught by Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, and Epictetus, constantly calls us to the responsibility of taking action and striving towards our goals. The individual who waits for things to happen without putting in the necessary work loses the right to complain about the results. Seneca reminded us that fortune favors the prepared, and without effort, nothing of value is built. The Stoic understands that effort is an obligation, not a burden. In everyday situations, it is common to find people who expect miracles without lifting a finger. They want prosperity, success, good relationships, but do not dedicate themselves to even the simplest actions that could transform their reality. An example of this is someone who wants a promotion at work, but does not make the effort to acquire new skills, does not invest time in learning or improving their capabilities. Marcus Aurelius, with his practical wisdom, would say, "Stop talking about what you are going to do and start doing it." Action is the foundation of any progress. A lack of self-effort also manifests itself when someone always expects others to do things for them. This can be seen in people who constantly depend on others to perform even the simplest tasks, without trying to learn or improve themselves. Epictetus, with his clear vision of self-sufficiency, would teach us that true power lies in being able to do things for yourself, and not in depending on others for small things. Self-effort gives us freedom. To correct this lack of effort, the first thing to do is to take full responsibility for your own life. Instead of waiting for something to fall from the sky, you need to start planting the seeds today. If you want to improve your finances, for example, the way to do it is not to wait for an inheritance or a stroke of luck. Start studying investments, personal economy, or look for a new source of income. Seneca would teach us that every little effort counts, and that constancy in action inevitably leads to transformation. In the field of relationships, a lack of self-effort is also a barrier. If you want to maintain a healthy relationship, you need to invest time, attention, and energy in it. Those who think that a relationship can sustain itself without dedication will see that relationship weaken over time. Stoicism reminds us that everything worthwhile requires work. Marcus Aurelius, in his Reflections, mentioned that the greatest virtues, such as patience, courage, and love, are only developed through continuous effort. Another important aspect is the impact of this lack of effort on one's own self-esteem. When we do not strive for what we want, we end up feeling a kind of internal emptiness. Epictetus reminded us that human beings find fulfillment in the act of overcoming challenges and growing. When we avoid effort, we also avoid the pleasure of achieving something through our own merit, and it is this merit that brings a genuine feeling of personal worth, of knowing that one is capable of overcoming any obstacle. Now, a reflective question. Have you been putting in the necessary effort in all the important areas of your life? Marcus Aurelius would say that wanting is not enough. You need to act with conviction and persistence. Maybe it's time to evaluate your priorities and, who knows, start acting with more determination towards your goals. Reason 7. Repetitive patterns of negative behavior. Repetitive patterns of negative behavior are like vicious cycles that, if not interrupted, end up shaping our entire lives. Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, and Epictetus, with their Stoic wisdom, show us that it is possible to break these cycles with a disciplined mind and a vigilant attitude. When a person finds themselves constantly repeating harmful attitudes, such as procrastination, impulsiveness, or pessimism, they are, in a way, enslaving themselves to these habits. Seneca would warn us, to live without self-control is to live like a boat adrift. These patterns can arise from small, everyday attitudes that, at first glance, seem harmless. A practical example would be the person who always reacts with anger when faced with any criticism. Over time, this becomes habitual behavior, and the consequences begin to appear: strained relationships, lost opportunities, and an increasingly isolated life. Epictetus taught us that it is not things that disturb us, but the view we have of them. By repeating these reactions without reflection, we are allowing our emotions to control us, instead of controlling our emotions. The problem with repetitive negative behaviors is that they become stronger with each repetition. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, reflected on the importance of nipping evil in the bud before it grows and dominates. The longer a person spends stuck in these habits, the harder it is to break the cycle. A common example is procrastination. Those who repeatedly procrastinate postpone not only tasks, but also their own progress. The solution, as Marcus Aurelius would advise, is to act now, without putting off what can be done at the moment. Breaking these patterns requires conscious and continuous effort. A practical exercise is to identify the exact moment when the negative behavior begins to manifest itself, and at that moment, take an opposite action. If the problem is reacting impatiently, practice pausing before speaking. If the problem is procrastination, commit to working for just 10 minutes on what needs to be done. Small adjustments like these, over time, reprogram the mind and help create new habits. Epictetus would teach us that self-control begins with awareness of our actions. Another pitfall of repetitive patterns of negative behavior is the habit of blaming others or circumstances for one's mistakes. When a person does this, they are avoiding responsibility for their actions, which keeps them stuck in the cycle. Seneca, with his practical wisdom, would say that the first step towards progress is to recognize one's own error. The solution lies in taking full responsibility for one's life, without taking refuge in excuses. The environment can also contribute to these cycles. Being around negative people or in constantly stressful situations reinforces bad behavior. Marcus Aurelius would encourage us to choose wisely who we allow into our social circle. If we are surrounded by people who only complain or who live in disorder, it is more difficult to maintain a calm mind and positive behavior. The solution may be to distance ourselves from negative influences and seek out more constructive environments. A thought: are you repeating patterns that are taking you nowhere? Epictetus would invite us to look within and ask ourselves, what kind of life do you want to build? Breaking these cycles is difficult, but not impossible, and the first step is to have the courage to recognize where these patterns manifest themselves. Reason 8, disrespect or abuse. Disrespect or abuse in interpersonal relationships is a behavior that destroys not only others, but also the characters of those who practice it. In Stoicism, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, and Epictetus teach us that we should treat everyone with dignity, regardless of the circumstances. Disrespect, whether through words or actions, goes against the Stoic principle of living in harmony with others. As Epictetus would teach us, no one has the right to disturb another's peace. And abuse is even more serious, as it imposes suffering and limits another's freedom. Unfortunately, it is very common to see examples of disrespect in everyday life. One example is the person who constantly interrupts others in a conversation, showing little or no interest in what the other has to say. This type of attitude demonstrates a lack of consideration and empathy. Marcus Aurelius would say that we should always remember our own fragility and the difficulties that everyone faces, and therefore we should act with compassion and patience. Disrespect, whether subtle or explicit, is a symptom of a lack of self-control. Abuse, in turn, can manifest itself in many ways, emotionally, physically, or verbally. Any type of abuse is a violation of the basic principles of respect for human dignity and has no place in a life that seeks virtues, as Seneca preached. He would warn us that a life based on abuse and disrespect is a life far from true inner peace. The one who abuses is, in fact, showing his own weakness and lack of control over his passions. One way to correct disrespect is to start practicing active listening. Genuinely pay attention to what the other person is saying before responding. If the tendency is to speak rudely or aggressively, try pausing before reacting. Epictetus would remind us that we have control over our reactions, and we can always choose the response that most aligns with our true nature. This simple act of self-control can transform the way we relate to others and build bridges instead of walls. In the family environment, disrespect can manifest itself in more subtle but equally destructive ways. A person who constantly invalidates the feelings of others, telling them they are exaggerating or weak, may be practicing emotional abuse without realizing it. Seneca would say that we should treat those closest to us with even greater care, because it is the most intimate relationships that have the power to shape us. If we do not respect these people, we are compromising our own development. Another example of disrespect can be found in the workplace, where abusive bosses or disloyal colleagues can create a toxic environment. Marcus Aurelius, in his Reflections, encourages us to be an example of virtue, even when we are surrounded by negative behavior. Instead of reacting in kind, he would say to stand firm in our values, always acting with dignity. This does not mean accepting abuse, but rather having the strength to react fairly without losing self-control. Finally, a thought. Have you allowed disrespect or abuse to be part of your life, whether as a victim or as an agent? Marcus Aurelius would invite us to be vigilant in relation to our actions and words, because every choice we make shapes our character. The Stoic path teaches us that by respecting others, we are respecting ourselves. Conclusion: have you noticed how often the people around you can become a burden instead of a support? It's time to reflect. Do you really need to keep helping those who only bring disrespect and dependence? Stoicism teaches us that self-care and preserving our energy are essential for a balanced and virtuous life. Think about the relationships you have and ask yourself, do they lift you up or drag you down? Change begins when you decide to prioritize those who truly deserve it. So, how about starting to apply these principles right now? Identify those people who don't bring anything positive to your life and make a conscious effort to distance yourself from them. It's an act of courage and self-love, not selfishness. Remember that life is short and time is a precious resource. Invest in those who appreciate your efforts, who truly want to grow and evolve. If you've made it this far, write balanced life in the comments to show that you're a winner who completed the video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more content like this. Share this video with those who might find it useful. Big hug and see you next time.